Right, so I want to point quickly to the piece of music that I was playing for you at the beginning of class. It's written by a German-Jewish composer by the name of Arnold Schoenberg. And it's called Pierrot Lunaire, or Moonstruck Clown. It's based on a poem by the French proto-surrealist poet Guillaume Apollinaire. Right? Essentially what Schoenberg did was take Apollinaire's poem and put it to music. Apollinaire was known for doing these kinds of like shape poems. For example, he wrote a poem about the Eiffel Tower that was in the shape of the Eiffel Tower. Now, what did you think of this piece of music? How easy was it to digest or to figure out, or did you just sort of let it wash over you?
It was sort of odd.
Pardon?
It was a little bit odd.
Okay, what was odd about it? What sounded odd about it?
I mean, mostly like gargling.
Okay, you heard things that sounded like gargling. Did it seem to fall into conventional musical scales? Were there things that sounded to you like they were off-key? Yeah, and that's on purpose, right? It's not because Schoenberg is an incompetent composer who doesn't know what he's doing. Schoenberg is the inventor of a new musical system that he called the 12-tone technique. There are 12 musical tones or notes on the regular chromatic scale. And we usually tend to arrange them into keys or into scales that harmonize with each other. What Schoenberg did was take those 12 notes out of their keys and devise a system, bless you, in which you are supposed to use each of the 12 tones an equal number of times without favoring any particular one, right? So no actual key or harmony develops. So it often ends up sounding discordant to those who are used to hearing regular, ordinary Western classical music. Now, what does this have to do with Kafka? Well, let's think back to those manifestos we read for last time, right? The futurists, the Dadaists, and the surrealists, what were they all trying to encourage their readers, viewers, listeners, whatever, to do? How do they want people to look at the everyday, ordinary world? The futurists wanted to combine everything with machines, right? The ideal futurist human would be some sort of man-machine hybrid. Actually, the ideal human would be not human at all, would be all machine. Right? The Dadaists refuse to see reason or logic in anything and embrace pure nonsense and juvenile pranks. And the surrealists want to dig under the surface of everyday experience and pull out incongruous dream content, right? So what they're trying to encourage people to do is look at the everyday, ordinary world, the world that's developing around them, with fresh eyes. And this is what distinguishes what we call modern from what is merely contemporary. Right? You're contemporary with whatever is happening at the time you're alive, right? So the contemporary is whatever is normal in any particular time period. That which is modern tries not so much to represent its time period as it is, but tries to look ahead a little bit into the future. Right? So that which is modern is always a little bit ahead of its time. It's never really of any particular time. In part because the purpose of a modernism is to get you to look at your everyday reality through different lenses, through fresh eyes. So we tend to talk about modernism as though it's a distinct literary movement or artistic movement, It's not. It's a series of micro movements and individual artists who are doing similar things. But what they have in common is an attempt to kind of defamiliarize the everyday, to break down everyday experience and show it to you in a different sort of light. And this can make it really, really hard to update a modernist work or to make it feel in some way contemporary. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to show you a short clip from an animated series that used to air late nights on the Cartoon Network. It's called Home Movies. And it's about these children who make, they're amateur filmmakers. They make movies in their garage. And one of their acquaintances writes a rock opera based on Kafka's Metamorphosis. So I want you to watch their little rock opera and think about how well Kafka's tale actually fits into this context, right? How good an adaptation is this? Why is it good or why is it bad? Are we working yet? Yes, looks like it. Great.
Be careful if you get him pissed. Franz, he'll smite you with Metropolis. Right now we can. He's just a burning man, a warrior of words taking a stand. He grew up very wild. He steals to the core. Born in 1883, died in 1924. He is Franz Kafka. Oh look, but there he is. What will he say?
I'm a lonely German. I'm only German from Prague. I wonder what I'll write about. I think I'll write about
I don't know what's wrong with me, I've been turned into a bug. I see double what I see, everything turned into a bug. I ain't got no self-esteem, I think I'm turned into a bug. Bet you $50 on my man, on my salad, I'm turned into a bug. Mama like a daddy, like a baby, like a baby, like a turn into a bug. Yeah! Living like a bug ain't easy. My old clothes don't seem to fit me. I got little tiny bug feet, I don't really know what bugs in. Don't want no one stepping on me, now I'm sympathizing with fleas. Living like a bug ain't easy. Living like a bug ain't easy.
Welcome to Habit, Franz. My name is God. I think you're going to like it here.
Okay, so let's think first about what this adaptation seems to get right. What do they seem to understand? What do they seem to get right about the story?
He becomes a bug.
Okay, he becomes a bug.
Nobody likes him after.
Pardon?
Nobody likes him after.
Yeah, well, do we get the sense of Gregors Samsa's loneliness from this?
Yes.
Yeah,
How?
the kid crying with the snot running.
Yeah, they got okay, you've got the little kid crying with the snot running down, but does anybody actually seem to feel that much sympathy for Gregor in the story, though?
No.
Part of the point of the story, right, is Gregor's alienation from everyone and everything in his previous life. right? And here we've got, he's constantly surrounded by people, right? He's got doctors checking him out, right? He gets to meet God at the end of this, right? Welcome to heaven, Franz. My name is God. Love that. But yeah, there are always people around in this, right? He's less alienated than he's supposed to be in the story. What did they get right, though? What do they have down?
Being really sad about being a bug.
Well, he seems to largely come to accommodation with being a bug, right?
I like the costume thing. He's still himself, even though he is a bug throughout the story.
Yeah, even though he can't communicate in the story that it's still him in there to anyone, right? This is part of his essential problem, is like, they get to decide whether or not this is still Gregor. It's not up to him to decide anymore. Other people are making decisions about his humanity. If we look at the living like a bug ain't easy segment thing, right? Like, what sorts of things do we see him doing there?
Trying to stomp on him.
Okay, yeah, he's trying to avoid that giant foot that's stomping, right? Much like the father tried to stomp him back into the bedroom.
That's supposed to be the part of the story he's crawling on the walls when they went upside down.
Yeah, he can range freely over the room. Yeah, he's got the little bowl of garbage, right? I don't really know what bugs eat, right? One of the first things he tries to do when he wakes up as a bug also is he tries to get dressed and go to work, right? So that part seems to be the most reflective of the actual story. What else do we see? But what else do we see going on here that's wrong? For one thing, who is it here that turns into a bug? Is it Gregors Samsa, the character?
No, it's the actual guy, the author.
Yeah, they over-identify the author with the character, right? That's one thing we have to be absolutely clear about here, right? Gregors Samsa is not Franz Kafka. This is not autobiography, even symbolic or allegorical autobiography, right? Kafka's own life bore only superficial resemblances to some of the things that happen to Gregors Samsa. So it does have a sort of contemporary tendency to over-identify the story with the author's psychology, right? What else seems not quite right about this, if anything? How does Gregor's story actually end? Does it end with transcendence and being lifted up into heaven?
No.
Then his family leave.
Just die.
Yeah. There is no such reward in the afterlife for Gregors Samsa, right? He just expires, and that's it. We hear no more from him. Which is weird considering that for the entire piece he's been the perspective character, right? Everything is from his perspective up until he finally decides, okay, it's time to die. So yeah, this is just, it's a 2.5 minute parody video from a cartoon, right? Its only purpose is to amuse. But its adaptation of the material is really, really loose, in part because it's hard to take this in a way that makes it lighthearted, right? That makes it funny. Now, Kafka intended for the story to be funny, but it's not really funny, ha-ha, right? And one of the reasons for that is that our perspective character is indeed the guy who has been transformed. It's the guy who has been changed into a bug. Does Gregors Samsa have any idea why he's a bug?
Nope. So that's the weird part to me, is it never gives any kind of explanation. It's just kind of like he woke up like that.
Yeah, he woke up one morning and he was a bug, right? When Gregors Samsa awoke one morning from troubled dreams, he found himself changed into a monstrous cockroach in his bed. That's it. Right? We know he had bad dreams the night before. We don't know why he's a bug. He doesn't know why he's a bug. He just is. Gregor as human being never appears in the story except in memory. Right, so Gregors Humanity, this is an important thing to remember, is just a memory. Where do we see representations of his humanity?
The furnishings in his room.
Okay, yeah, he clings to the furnishings in his room because of the memories he has attached to them, right? It's like, I've had that writing desk since I was a child, right? This wardrobe has always been here, right? So he has these memories attached to objects. Good. Do we see any physical representations of Gregor as a human being? If we look on page 217, bottom of the page, it's describing the state of the dining room on the morning Gregor wakes up. Right? Just opposite, on the facing wall, was a photograph of Gregor from his period in the army as a lieutenant, his hand on his saber, smiling confidently, the posture and uniform demanding respect. So we have the photograph as a representation of Gregor as human being. And we also have, at another point, his memories of human connections, right? As he becomes more and more disconnected from his family, we look on page 233, he remembers all of these fleeting connections that he's made. Gregor spent his days and nights almost without sleeping. Sometimes he thought that the next time they opened the door, he would take the business of the family in hand, just exactly as he had done before. After a long time, the director figured in his thoughts again, and the chief clerk, the junior clerk and the trainees, the dim-witted factotum, a couple of friends he had in other companies, a chambermaid in a hotel out in the provinces somewhere, a sweet, fleeting memory, a cashier in a hat shop whom he had courted assiduously but far too slowly. All of these appeared to him, together with others he never knew or had already forgotten, but instead of helping him and his family, they were all inaccessible to him, and he was glad when they went away again. So apart from his family, what do his connections to other people seem to have been like? What seems to have been the nature of his connections to people outside of his immediate family?
Work-related.
Work-related. Yeah, even his romantic dalliance in that, the chambermaid in the hotel, right? This is a business trip thing, right? He had a little affair on a business trip. Almost all of his connections are work-related in some way. What is the first thing, we talked about him, getting up, getting dressed, right? What are his primary thoughts when he first wakes up as a bug? Is it, oh shit, I'm a bug?
It's time to get up and go to work.
Yeah, he's upset because he's going to miss his train. And then he might get in trouble at the office, right? Now, one of the best scenes, for my money anyway, in the novel is when the chief clerk comes to visit him. Right after the reference to the photo, he comes out of the room in bug shape and tries to explain himself to the chief clerk, right? So if we look on page 218, now, said Gregor, in the knowledge that he was the only one present to have maintained his equanimity, I'm just going to get dressed, pack up my samples, and then I'll set off. Do you want to let me set out, do you? You see. Chief Clerk, you'll see I'm not stubborn. I like my work. The travel is arduous, but I couldn't live without it. Where are you off to, Chief Clerk? To work? Is that right? Will you accurately report everything you've seen here? Is it possible to be momentarily unfit for work? But that is precisely the time to remind oneself of one's former achievements and to reflect that once the present obstacle has been surmounted, one's future work will be all the more diligent and focused, as you know all too well. I am under a great obligation to the director. In addition, I have responsibilities for my parents and my sister. I am in a jam, but I will work my way out of it. Only don't make it any harder for me than it is already. Give me your backing at the head office. I know the traveling salesman is not held in the highest regard there. People imagine he earns a packet and has a nice life on top of it. These and similar assumptions remain unexamined. But you, Chief Clerk, you have a greater understanding of the circumstances than the rest of the staff. You even, if I may say this to you in confidence, have an understanding superior to that of the director himself, who, as an entrepreneur, is perhaps too easily swayed against an employee. You are also very well aware that the traveling salesman, spending as he does the best part of the year away from head office, may all too easily fall victim to tittle-tattle, to mischance, and to baseless allegations, against which he has no way of defending himself, mostly even does not get to hear of, and when he returns exhausted from his travels, it is to find himself confronted directly by practical consequences of whose causes he is ignorant. Chief Clerk, don't leave without showing me by a word or two of your own that you at least partly agree with me. So what is he trying to do with this speech? Yeah, he wants the chief clerk to try to see things from his point of view so that he won't be fired, right? He's trying to save his job. But what makes this scene comical and bizarre? Yeah, a giant cockroach has just emerged out of a bedroom giving an eloquent speech about why it deserves to keep its job. This is not normal. This is not the sort of thing that happens. Right? What this is an example of what Freud called the uncanny. Now, by the uncanny, what Freud means is that which attracts us with its similarity or familiarity, while at the same time repulsing us with its difference. So we can recognize, on the one hand, the harassed employee, the traveling salesman, trying to save his ass at work. But he's been turned into this repulsive creature. And this makes the scene both terrifying and comical. Right? And the chief clerk's reaction is itself comical, right? But the chief clerk had turned his back on Gregor the moment he had begun speaking, and only stared back at him with mouth agape, over his trembling shoulder. All the while Gregor was speaking, he wasn't still for a moment, but, without taking his eyes off Gregor, moved towards the door, but terribly gradually, as though in breach of some secret injunction not to leave the room. Although he was in the hallway, and to judge by the sudden movement with which he snatched his foot back out of the living room for the last time, one might have supposed he had burned his soul. Once in the hallway, he extended his right hand fervently in the direction of the stairs, as though some supernatural salvation there awaited him. So what does the chief clerk do, confronted with this talking bug?
He books it.
Yeah, he hightails it out of there as fast as possible. Right? He does not stay to argue with it. He does not stay to listen to its entreaties. He reacts the way most people would if confronted with a giant talking cockroach. Now, do we even know whether Gregor can make himself understood with speech?
Not really.
He knows what he wants to say. He knows what he's trying to convey, but we don't necessarily get a sense from anyone around him that they can understand what he says, even at this point. Right? He assumes people understand him because they knock on the door, he mumbles something, and they go away. But there's no evidence that anyone else can understand his speech. So he is unable to communicate what has happened to him. Even if he did understand it himself. So what else do we note about Gregors' relationship with the company he works for? What's the director of this company like? How's the director described? If we look towards the beginning of the story when he's musing about the life he leads as a traveling salesman. We're given an image of the director here on page 211. He slid back into his previous position. All this getting up early, he thought, is bound to take its effect. A man needs proper bed rest. There are some other traveling salesmen I could mention who live like harem women. Sometimes, for instance, when I return to the pension in the course of the morning to make a note of the morning's orders, some of those gents are just sitting down to breakfast. I'd like to see what happened if I tried that with my director sometime. It would be the order of the boot just like that. That said, it might be just the thing for me. If I didn't have to exercise restraint for the sake of my parents, then I would have quit a long time ago. I would have gone up to the director and told him exactly what I thought of him. He would have fallen off his desk in surprise. That's a peculiar way he has of sitting anyway, up on his desk, and talking down to his staff from on high, making them step up to him very close because he's so hard of hearing. So, what picture do we get of the director here?
He's a jerk.
Rich and bossy.
Okay, old, rich, bossy, he's a jerk, right? Tight-fisted, doesn't give his employees the benefit of the doubt. And if we just look at the visual image as well that we're given of the director, how is he physically described here? Where does he place himself physically in relation to his employees?
Higher up.
Yeah, high up above them, right? A desk that's high up. And if employees want him to hear them, they have to get up very, very close to him and talk in his ear. Right? So what kind of picture of authority is this?
Almost like a dictator.
Okay, why would you say like a dictator, Ashley?
I mean, because it kind of feels like that you almost have to kiss up to him in order to get at least
Sure.
a little bit of leeway.
Yeah, if you were just one of the normal ants on the ground, wandering about doing your job, does he pay any attention to you? Does he notice you? So this is a distant authority figure, right? And if you want something from him, right, can you request it from down here where you are? No, you have to climb up and shout it at him. So he's distant and he is deaf to your pleas. How might this accord with some of the modernist visions of society that we've been talking about?
So he's kind of like the government to like the little people.
Okay, sort of, yeah, maybe a government figure that is unresponsive. What else might he represent? If we think of authority figures that people look to in times of trouble. One that's so high up he can't actually hear you.
President or a monarch.
Well, that would fall in with the government thing, right? Someone who just doesn't answer your prayers. Yeah, a God, like a sort of unresponsive God, right? Who doesn't pay any attention to the struggles or the sufferings of human beings on earth, right? Remember, we're looking at a period just after the First World War, when hundreds of thousands of people were killed, a lot of productive land was destroyed, a lot of people were displaced, and a lot of people were extremely angry. and feeling like the institutions that they'd served and loved all their lives were no longer meeting their needs or serving their needs. So yeah, so the director of the company is also rather like a distant and unresponsive God. So, why is it that Gregor continues to work for this company? Yeah, he's essentially enslaved to them, right? His parents, his father particularly, owe a debt to the director. And before his transformation, what does Gregor's relationship with his family seem to have been like?
Kind of crappy. I mean, it was just like, here's a source of money for the family, that's about it.
Yeah, it's a business relationship. He's paying off the parents' debt. Right? He comes home with his pay, he comes home with the money. They thank him for it, and eventually they cease to even thank him for it, right? It just becomes expected. Now, once he's transformed into a bug, what does he learn about his father's business affairs once his father thinks he can no longer hear him? Was everything lost? Was everything actually wiped out?
No.
Yeah, they had some money squirreled away that could have been used to pay down the loan to get Gregor off faster. But they didn't. They held on to that money. And Gregor's level of submissiveness to his family is displayed in the fact that he thinks of that as wise management, right? Rather than being angry about being forced to continue in a job he hates with a distant, nasty authority figure who doesn't trust him or listen to him. Right. The family is the institution that bound him to it. So, he's already, in some sense, alienated from the family even before he's transformed. And this photograph, right, in his army uniform with a saber demanding respect, is that an honest photograph that depicts what Gregor was like before he changed? Yeah, the photograph's a projection of strength and authority, right? I'm an officer in a uniform with a sword. I'm smiling. But he's always been a subordinate. He's always been somebody's lackey. And even in bug life, he finds no way out of it. Now, each of these, the story is divided up into 3 parts, and each focuses on a different aspect of Gregor's relationships to the world inside and outside himself, right? So the first part focuses mostly on his professional relationships, right? The key scene is the chief clerk coming in to find out why he hasn't come to work, right? That seems unusually intrusive, yeah? I mean, for your average job, is your boss, is your supervisor going to show up at your door if you don't come to work and say, hey, why aren't you on the train? No, right? I mean, hell, like if, I never skip work. I never skip work. Maybe I ought to one of these days. But if I did, right, Dr. Bryan wasn't going to show up on my front door and say, hey, you didn't come to your class today, right? Where were you? What were you doing? If that ever does happen, I hope I have been transformed into a giant cockroach and can answer the door in that state. But yeah, what we get is the sense that his job is unusually oppressive. Right? Unusually suspicious. And that his relation to, he's just been beaten down by it. The second part focuses primarily on his relationships with the family. And who seems to be his primary caregiver?
His sister.
Okay, the sister, yeah. And what's the sister like? What do we know about the sister?
She young.
Okay, she's young.
Supposedly really pretty.
She got a job at the office.
Okay, eventually gets a job, right? Once elder brother can no longer work.
She stopped taking care of him. When he stopped cleaning his room.
Yeah, she's supposed to clean it. She's supposed to clean his room. And she becomes his sort of interpreter to the rest of the family, right? She explains to everyone else what it is she thinks he needs. How often does she get this right?
Not very.
Yeah, he's not able to communicate to her what he actually wants. He can't tell her, for example, when he objects to having all of his furniture removed, right? The only thing he can do is that weird thing he does to the picture, which we'll get to in a moment. But yeah, he can't stop her from essentially doing what she wants with his things, with his room. Not only that, she's really kind of his only source of any kind of human contact, right? The mother is terrified by him. And how does the father treat him?
Distant.
Pardon?
Distant, like, I think he was like,
Well, who takes over for the chief clerk when the chief clerk runs away in fear? Who takes the situation in hand and drives Gregor back into the bedroom?
His father.
Yeah. The father, once work is removed as a source of authority, takes over, right? Jumps into that position. And we see by the end of this second part, the whole family uniting against Gregor. If you look on page 231, right, when the father has been hurling apples at his cockroach son, who has escaped the room. A feebly tossed apple brushed against Gregor's back, only to bounce off it harmlessly. One thrown a moment later, however, secured to pierce it, Gregor tried to drag himself away, as though the bewildering and scarcely credible pain might pass if he changed position. But he felt as though nailed to the spot, and in complete disorientation, he stretched out. With one last look, he saw how the door to his room was flung open, and his mother ran out in front of his howling sister in her chemise. Her sister must have undressed her to make it easier for her to breathe after her fainting fit. How his mother ran towards his father, and as she ran, her loosened skirts successively slipped to the floor. And how, stumbling over them, she threw herself at his father, and embracing him in complete union with him. But now Gregor's eyesight was failing him. With her hands clasping the back of his head, begged him to spare Gregor's life. So there's this weird scene where his mother runs half naked out of the room, jumps on the father, embraces him. They're in complete union with each other. The father is hurling apples to kill Gregor. The mother is begging for his life. The sister is running out howling. Right? And Gregor is just nailed to the spot, immobile. Right? Can't move. Can't even get back into the room. So, what do we make of the union of the parents here? They're
Like an agreement type deal, like
Mhm.
you and her trying to like reason with him and finally like have some kind of understanding.
Yeah, and what's the only way she can reason with him and get him not to kill the bug? Okay, well. Okay, maybe that's part of it, right? It does, like, there is something weirdly and bizarrely sexual about the scene, right? Given the mother's state of undress, and it's also like given these are old people, right? Yeah, have fun picturing that. But yeah, essentially, like the only way she can get him not to kill the son is to jump on him and embrace him, right? That's what gets him to preserve. That's what gets the father to preserve the son's life. The submission of the mother, intellectual and sexual. Right. So everyone by the end of the scene is starting to submit to the father's authority. Howling sister and half undressed mother. Now, what about this third section? With what set of Gregors relationships does the third section seem to be concerned? Is it concerned with his relationships at all? What does it seem to you to be mostly concerned with? How does Gregor relate to the world around him in the third section? Is the sister still coming regularly to clean his room?
No.
Is she still trying to do things like find out the sort of food he likes?
No.
No.
Does he come to terms with what he is, like being lonely?
Yeah, essentially it's his internal struggle with his own disorder, right? He is, by this point, pretty much completely alienated from the family. Right. Sometimes they'll open his door a crack, but by and large, the only person who talks to him is that housekeeper. Right. She'll open the door, affectionately insult him, and then that's it. Now, through most of this, he's starving, right? He talks about how he's just not really eating anymore. But who does he see stuffing their faces? Yeah, there are these three tenants. That the parents have taken in. And the parents are treating them almost excessively, right? The only things Gregor is given to eat, right? He's given garbage to eat. Of course, granted, he prefers eating garbage. If you look on page 235, they took their places at the table where previously father, mother, and Gregor had sat, unfurled their napkins, and took up their eating irons. Straightway, his mother appeared in the doorway carrying a dish of meat, and hard behind her came his sister with a bowl heaped with potatoes. The food steamed mightily. The tenants inclined themselves to the dishes in front of them, as though to examine them before eating, and the one who was sitting at the head of the table, and who seemed to have some authority over the other two flanking him, cut into a piece of meat in the dish, as though to check whether it was sufficiently done, and didn't have to be sent back to the kitchen. He seemed content with what he found, and mother and sister, who had been watching in some trepidation, broke into relieved smiles. The family were taking their meal in the kitchen. Even so, before going in there, the father came in and with a single reverence, cap in hand, walked once round the table. All the tenants got up and muttered something into their beards. Once they were on their own again, they ate in near silence. It struck Gregor that out of all the various sounds one could hear, it was that of their grinding teeth that stood out, as though to demonstrate to Gregor that teeth were needed to eat with, and the best toothless gums were no use. But I do have an appetite, Gregor said to himself earnestly, only not for those things, the way those tenants fill their boots, while I'm left to starve. So who have the tenants displaced in the house?
Gregor.
They've displaced Gregor. He doesn't want what they're eating, but he resents that they're being given so much while he's getting so little. And who else have they displaced? Who should be eating at that dining room table?
Family.
Yeah, it used to be the family dining room. It used to be where they all sat together and ate. But these tenants have displaced the family and have put the family in the kitchen. Now, how would we define the relationship between the tenants and the family? How are they connected to each other?
They pay them rent, and that's about it.
Yeah, it's a business relationship, right? So this business relationship takes precedence over the family relationships. Now, have we seen this elsewhere in the story?
Yeah, he lost his job, so they just kind of ended it. The only reason they needed him is because he was working.
Yeah, Gregor for the family was most valuable as a work unit, right? As a work unit to support the family, none of whom were doing anything at the time he was first stricken. In fact, how did the parents regard the sister before Gregor's transformation? What's the word they used to describe her? Yeah, she was a rather useless girl because she wasn't working. Right, so the individual here in this little society that Kafka sets up is defined primarily by his or her work value, right? By his or her use value. In fact, when is it that the father seems to come more into himself and to develop a stronger air of authority?
When he has to get a job?
Yeah, when he has to get a job and he has that uniform, right? Now the uniform is just, basically the uniform like a gopher at the bank. But that uniform indicates a professional function, right? A job function. A place in the business world, a place in the system, which before the father did not have or had lost through bankruptcy. So he's gaining strength as he regains that place. So this is kind of a bleak view of human life, right? That human beings are only valuable in that they can work and in that they can earn money. And otherwise, they're useless. They're parasites. Once they can no longer earn money, they're like giant cockroaches just occupying a room in the middle of your apartment. So this is all tied into a German language arts movement of the early 20th century called Expressionism. Kafka is not strictly an expressionist, but he's aware of the movement and is clearly influenced by it. So I'm going to start by showing you a brief clip from a famous expressionist film, and we're going to try to figure out, just sort of by induction, what expressionism is, right? So the film I'm going to show you is, this is the beginning of Fritz Lang's Metropolis. And I just want you to watch, observe, tell me what you see. And there's not supposed to be any sound. This is a silent film. Oh, could somebody get those blinds there? This is black and white, so this is going to be hard to see otherwise. Thank you. Did I not turn that on? Shit. All right. Well, best intentions. Are we working yet? Now we can see this, yes? Okay. Okay, so what do we see here? Pardon?
It looks like a pyramid building.
Yeah, like what kinds of buildings? What would we call those sorts of buildings? Yeah, good. We got skyscrapers. What about here?
Pistons.
Yeah, pistons pumping. Good.
Machines.
Machines running. The inexorable ticking away of time. Shift change. Now pay close attention here to the human beings, the way they move, the way they're dressed, what seems to be happening here.
There's stoic and it's like a routine they go by.
Yep, they're expressionless.
It looks dystopian.
Yeah, dystopian. Yeah, the dystopian, robotic. They're all moving in unison, right? Yeah, they do look like prisoners, right? They're looking down. They're shuffling along.
I'm sure they're not talking.
What's that?
I said, I'm sure they're not talking, so it's just work and reading.
Yep. Yeah, they're. We can't tell if they're talking or not because it's silent, but yeah, their mouths aren't moving. You see this river of people coming, river of people going.
It looks like a shift change.
Yeah.
I mean, you figure the people leaving will at least be happy.
Yeah. Now you'll see why they're not smiling, even though they're off work. Deep under the earth lies the city of the workers.
So they're minors.
Oh, this is really dystopian.
Now these are the guys who run those machines that you saw.
What language was that?
German. And right, remember those skyscrapers we saw at the beginning, right? They're skyscrapers. They're open to the sky, right? These guys live underground, right? We see a ceiling with lights over their city. In the plot of the film, these are the guys who keep the city above ground, which is sort of a playground for the rich, running. And they're just shuffling off to the identical buildings they live in, to identical apartments, to identical despair. So, how is this like the Kafka story? What similarities does this bear to the Metamorphosis? Yeah, the centrality of work to human life, right? And work being the thing that both gives your life shape and also makes it miserable. One thing we may notice about the first parts of the Metamorphosis that's missing from the rest, right? What is he very, very aware of in the first part that might relate to something in this film?
Has to go to work, like mandatory.
Yeah, that he has to go to work. And how does he know that he's in trouble at work?
Late.
He's late, yes. The first part of the Metamorphosis is the only part in which there's any real sense of time. Why do we organize days into 24 measurable hours?
To fill work slots?
Yeah, exactly. Because to determine how long people are supposed to be working. Right now, we didn't always do this. You know, you used to go outside when the sun came up, do your planting, your plowing, your hoeing, whatever, and then go back inside when the sun came down. Eat a meal, go to sleep for a little while, wake up for a little bit, do something else, and then go back to sleep, right? You didn't need to measure your days in accordance with hours if hours were not the units by which you were paid. So the clock ticking, right, the idea of time, the way we currently measured it, is essentially made necessary by industrial capitalism, by the way factory work was shaped, right? Now this also, as we noted, determines to some extent Gregors' value as a human being. Once he can't work, he has no value. He becomes a burden on the family. It's from this era, from sort of the late 19th, early 20th centuries, that we start getting our modern definition of disability. Previously, in pre-industrial societies, right, a disabled person wasn't somebody who couldn't work. It was maybe somebody who wasn't suited to certain kinds of work, right? But if there was somebody in the village who didn't have a leg or was blind or couldn't hear, right, you found other things for that person to do. That person still contributed to community life in some way. The way we currently define disability is largely determined by the shape of, first by industrial capitalism and then by finance capitalism, right? For industrial capitalism, it was people who couldn't work in a factory. So if you're blind, you're deaf, you're missing a limb, right? You can't do adequate factory work. Now, we have come to redefine disability to include now people who have trouble in certain knowledge-based and technological applications as well, as the economy has changed and expanded. But yeah, Gregor is in many ways, there's a good essay on there's a good article on this. I think I posted it to the bibliography on Georgia View. It's by a guy by the name of James Metzger, which looks at Gregor Samsa as a disabled person, like sort of looking at him in terms of discourses of disability and caregiving. So that might be another direction. We don't really have time to discuss this in detail, but that might be another direction worth exploring here. We are about out of time. Does anybody have any questions about this or comments, concerns? Okay, so we're going to be looking next time. We've been pretty Europe-centric of late, and we're going to be working to change that. We're going to be looking at a Chinese modernist text next time, Lu Chung's Diary of a Madman. I promise you it is easier to read and understand than the Story of the Stone. So I have some reading questions for you, which will appear momentarily. There they are. I have your last in-class writing to get back to you, and just make sure that